Sunlight barely filtered through the heavy curtains of the third-floor apartment where Janine lived. The woman, always consumed by work and worries about her son, Mikey, sat once again in the kitchen, scrolling through a list of bills that needed to be paid. Her slender fingers nervously glided over the edges of the papers as thoughts about the future swirled in her mind. Mikey was already growing up. His education required significant funds, and Janine, as a single mother, was trying to provide him with the best. In the evenings, she was supported by her mother, Zelma, a woman with a stern face and a heart full of kindness. She was the pillar that kept Janine on her feet after a difficult divorce. Along with them lived Mikey, who dreamed of becoming an engineer and studying at a prestigious institute. "Hi, Janine. How's it going?" came the voice of her neighbor, Tim, who had dropped by. He entered the kitchen with a small smile on his face. Tim was an old friend of Janine's. Their apartments were next to each other, and he always came to help when something needed fixing or when heavy groceries had to be brought in. "Hi, Tim," Janine replied, a bit tired but with warmth. "Nothing new. Just bills, work, and that's it all the time." Tim leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms over his chest. "I knew it. Listen, Janine, you don't take any time to rest. You work all the time, and your son needs attention too. Why don't you come to the theater with me tonight?" Janine looked at him with unexpected interest, but her expression soon clouded over again. "Tim, I would go, but I want to spend time with Mikey today. We hardly see each other because of work." Tim sighed. He had invited Janine out several times before, but she always turned him down due to her obligations to her son. "Well, okay, but you can't keep saying no all the time. He's already grown up. He needs some independence, and you need to find time for yourself. Don't you agree that it's important?" He winked at her, but it was clear he was a bit disappointed. Janine just smiled in response and returned to her thoughts, listening as Tim continued to talk about the play that might interest her. After Tim left, Janine was left alone with her doubts. Is he right? The thought flashed through her mind. Mikey really isn't that little boy he was just a few years ago. Maybe he can handle things without my constant attention. But the doubts quickly faded when she saw her son sitting at the table with a pile of textbooks. "Mom, did Tim stop by again?" Mikey asked, not looking up from his notes. "Yeah, he wanted to invite me to the theater," Janine replied, sitting down next to her son. "Why didn't you go?" "I'm doing my homework anyway. You should have taken some time to relax," Mikey said, glancing at her. In his eyes was not only concern but also a hint of weariness from his mother's constant presence. Janine smiled and kissed him on the forehead. "No, sweetheart, I'd rather be here with you. How's school going? Everything okay?" "Yeah, Mom, it's all good," Mikey answered, but there was a slight tension in his words. Well, it seemed this day wouldn't be any different from the others. Janine prepared for yet another quiet evening at home with her son, but the inner sense of unease wouldn't leave her. The next morning, Janine woke up early, as always, to get ready for work. Sleep still weighed heavily on her eyelids, but soon the daily routine fully consumed her. Mikey, still sleepy, emerged from his room, stretching and letting out a soft sigh as if waking up at such an early hour was a struggle. "Good morning, Mom," he said quietly, sitting down at the table. "Good morning, sweetheart," Janine replied, pouring him some tea. "How did you sleep? Are you all set for today's classes?" Mikey nodded, but there was a noticeable tension on his face that didn't escape Janine's watchful gaze. She set the cup in front of him and sat down beside him. "What's wrong, honey? You seem a bit tense," she asked, leaning slightly towards him to meet his eyes. "It's nothing, Mom. I'm fine, Mikey replied, quickly looking away again. Janine sensed that something was wrong, but she didn't press him. She knew all too well how tough it was to be a teenager, especially during such a challenging time when everything was changing. Yet, the feeling of anxiety she had experienced yesterday lingered. After dropping Mikey off at school, Janine hurried to her job. She worked in a small office, handling paperwork and communicating with clients. The day passed quickly, as always, filled with tasks and concerns. But when she returned home in the evening, an unexpected phone call awaited her. "Hello? Ms. Jenkins?" came a voice from the phone. "Yes, I'm listening," Janine replied, surprised that someone was looking for her at such a late hour. "This is Ollie, Mikey's homeroom teacher. I wanted to inform you that your son hasn't attended school for 2 weeks," the teacher said, with a hint of hesitation in her voice. Janine felt her heart drop. "What do you mean he hasn't attended? He goes to school every day and works hard on his assignments. I understand this may come as a surprise to you, but he hasn't been showing up for classes. We've checked with his classmates. No one knows where he's spending his time," Ollie added, and her voice carried a sense of concern. Janine sank onto the couch, clutching the phone in her hand. "This can't be. He hasn't said anything to me. I'll call him and find out what's going on. He will be at school tomorrow, I promise you." Her voice trembled with outrage and fear. "Please, Ms. Jenkins, talk to him. It's important that he doesn't miss any more classes," Ollie replied, and Janine rushed to end the call. Setting the phone aside, Janine immediately went to Mikey's room. Her heart raced, thoughts tangled, and fear flooded her mind. Mikey was sitting at the computer when his mother entered the room. "Mikey," she said, trying to control her voice. He glanced at her but quickly averted his eyes. "Yeah, Mom." His voice sounded too calm, which only heightened her concern. "I just spoke with your teacher. She said you haven't been attending school for 2 weeks. Can you explain what's going on?" Her voice turned firm and stern. Mikey's face changed slightly, but he tried to maintain his composure. "That's a mistake. I go to school. It's just that sometimes I don't make it to class because of other things." He began to evade a direct answer. "Mikey, don't lie to me. You know I don't like dishonesty. Why are you skipping school? And what are these other things?" Janine tried to keep her patience, but she felt her words falling into the void. "Mom, it's all under control. I'm just a bit busy with other projects, that's all." Mikey looked like he was trying to hide something, his eyes still not meeting his mother's gaze. Janine could no longer hold back her outrage. "What projects are you talking about? You promised you would study hard, and now I find out you haven't been to school for 2 weeks. Mikey stood up, raising his hands as if to defend himself. "Mom, I know it looks bad, but I have everything under control. I can handle it myself, trust me." His voice trembled, and Janine realized he was hiding something. "Trust? I can't trust you when you're lying to me, son." Her voice softened but remained firm. "If you don't go back to school tomorrow, you could get expelled. Is that what you want?" Mikey, sullenly nodding, silently turned back to his computer. Janine stood in the doorway, unsure of what to do next. She had always thought they had an open relationship, but now everything felt different. Janine couldn't sleep all night, thinking about her son. Her heart was heavy with fear and an inexplicable sense of foreboding. Something was wrong, but she didn't know how to get to the truth. In the morning, she decided she would take Mikey to school to ensure he actually went. As they approached the school, Mikey looked a bit uneasy but calmly said goodbye to his mother. "Don't worry, Mom, I'm going to class," he said, turning back to her with an uncertain smile. Janine stood by the school for a few more minutes, trying to calm herself. But just as she was about to turn back, something caught her attention. Mikey quickly darted out of the school and disappeared into the crowd. Now she was sure something was seriously wrong. She followed him, trying not to draw attention. Fear and uncertainty flooded her mind again, and every step raised more questions. Janine followed her son, feeling her heart flutter with anxiety. She tried to make her steps quiet, keeping her eyes fixed on Mikey's figure as he moved swiftly through the crowd. She had never been in a situation like this before. She didn't know what it felt like to stalk her own child as if he were a stranger. But something held her back from simply calling out to him and asking directly. Her intuition told her that this was something more than just skipping school. Mikey headed toward an old neighborhood known for its questionable spots. Janine's heart raced as she saw him approach a cafe on the corner where a man was standing. The stranger was tall and burly, looking significantly older than her son. They exchanged a few quick words, after which Mikey pulled a small package from his pocket. The man swiftly tucked it into his own pocket and handed Mikey some cash in return. Janine stopped, hiding her face behind a column of a building, and watched as her son, having accepted the money, quickly disappeared around the corner. "What on earth is going on?" she whispered, unable to contain her fear. Her thoughts spiraled into a panic as she struggled to comprehend what was happening. A wave of helplessness and shame washed over her. Janine decided not to act immediately. She needed more information. She wanted to understand what exactly her son was involved in. Returning home, she collapsed onto the couch, trying to make sense of what she had witnessed. Thoughts swirled in her mind, and her heart continued to race. A few hours later, when Mikey came home, Janine resolved to talk to him, but carefully. She couldn't tell him right away that she had been following him. "Hi, sweetie," she said, trying to mask her anxiety. Mikey dropped his backpack and sat at the kitchen table, looking a bit tired. "Hey, Mom. How are you?" he asked, as if nothing had happened. "Everything's good," Janine replied, studying him closely. "What about you? How was your day?" Mikey fidgeted slightly but tried to stay calm. "Fine, as always. School, lessons." Those words struck Janine. She knew he was lying, but she didn't know how to confront him without scaring him. "School, you say?" she said softly, glancing down at her cup of tea. "Where were you really?" Mikey froze, his hands trembling slightly. He looked away, and Janine could see the tension rapidly changing his expression. "What do you mean, Mom?" he said, trying to sound innocent. "I saw you today." "You weren't at school," she said directly, her voice calm but a fire burning within her. Mikey suddenly turned pale. He set his fork down on the table and stared at his mother with wide eyes. "You were following me?" he asked, incredulous. "I had to, Mikey. You didn't leave me a choice." Janine stood up and stepped closer to him. "You're lying to me. You haven't gone to school for 2 weeks. And what was that today? Who was that man, and what deal did you make with him?" Mikey stepped back, his face expressing real fear. "It's not what you think, Mom," he replied quickly, waving his hands. "I was just helping a friend with math, and he's been paying me for it. That's all." Janine couldn't believe those words. She had seen him hand over the package and receive money in return. It didn't seem like payment for tutoring. "Mikey," she said, approaching him closely. Her voice was quiet and steady but filled with determination. "Don't lie to me. I want to know the truth." Her son was silent for a few seconds, trying to find the right answer. Then he suddenly looked up, his eyes filling with tears. "Okay, Mom. I'll tell you everything," he sighed, as if he had finally given in. "That man. He asked me to sell some things. I didn't know what they were. I just thought I was helping out. He paid me for it," Mikey confessed, his voice trembling. "But now I don't know what to do." Janine felt her heart constrict at this confession. "Do you understand that this could be illegal?" she asked, hardly believing her ears. "Mom, I didn't know. I just wanted to make a little extra money. You know we don't have much," he replied, his eyes shining with tears. "That doesn't justify what you're doing," Janine said, feeling her world crumble. "You could put yourself in danger." Mikey stood silently, his head hanging low. Janine sighed, unsure of how to navigate this situation. Her son, her only support in life, had gotten himself into something terrible, and she didn't know how to fix it. "Okay," she said quietly. "We'll figure this out together. But you have to promise me you won't get involved in things like this anymore. Tomorrow we're going to school, and you need to return to your studies." Mikey nodded, but his face remained sad and guilty. Janine knew this was just the beginning, and more challenges lay ahead. She decided she needed to talk to Tim, who might help her sort things out. The next day, Janine, as promised, walked Mikey to school and made sure he entered the building. But her anxiety didn't dissipate. She knew the guy he had been meeting could be just the tip of the iceberg. Tim came over in the evening. He could tell right away that Janine was upset. They sat at the kitchen table, and she told him what had happened. "I think Mikey has gotten involved with the wrong crowd," Janine sighed, clasping her hands on the table. "I don't know how to help him." Tim shrugged. "We'll figure this out together. But first, we need to talk to that man. Maybe he's not as dangerous as he seems." Janine nodded, but inside she felt that it was not going to be that simple. For the next few days, Janine felt like she was walking on a knife's edge. Mickey seemed to have started going back to school, but she couldn't shake off the anxiety. She couldn't sleep peacefully, feeling that their family was caught up in something dangerous. Mickey diligently avoided any conversations about the man he had been seeing before, which only made Janine worry more. One evening, as Janine sat in the kitchen reviewing bills, the doorbell rang. It was Tim. He walked in as always, greeting her with a warm smile, but his eyes quickly turned serious when he noticed the tension on Janine's face. "Is something wrong?" he asked, sitting down at the table and nodding at the bills she held in her hands. "Nothing much, just tired," Janine sighed, but her face revealed that she was barely holding back emotions. "I keep thinking about Mickey. He's not telling me the truth. I can feel it." Tim crossed his arms over his chest and nodded. He was already aware of the situation after Janine had shared her suspicions about the deal Mickey had made with an unknown man. "I've been thinking about that," Tim said. "We need to have a serious talk with him. But this time, not as mother and son, but as two adults. He's not a little boy anymore, Janine. He needs clear boundaries and understandable consequences." "I know, but it's so hard for me. He's always been a good kid, and I just can't understand how this happened," she said, feeling tears welling in her eyes. "I feel like we're losing our connection." Tim stood up and moved closer to her. He gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're not losing him. He's just going through a tough time right now. Maybe he needs help. We can do something about it." Janine nodded, wiping her tears away. "You're right. But it's just so hard." They agreed that the next day after school, Tim would meet with Mickey and try to talk to him. Janine hoped this step would help, because no matter how hard she tried, Mickey had shut her out. The following day, Tim waited for Mickey by the school. He stood nearby the entrance, hidden in the shadows, watching as students poured out after classes ended. When he finally spotted Mickey, he felt his body tense up. The boy looked exhausted and somewhat anxious. "Mickey!" Tim's voice called out to him, and Mickey flinched, looking up in surprise. "Oh, hi, Tim," Mickey said, trying to feign nonchalance. "What are you doing here?" "Came to talk," Tim replied, stepping closer. He smiled, but in his eyes, Mickey saw seriousness. "Can we take a walk? There are a few important things we need to discuss." Mickey hesitated for a moment, then shrugged. "Sure, let's go." They walked down a narrow street leading to the park. Mickey tried not to show his nervousness, but he knew this conversation wouldn't be easy. Tim was a good family friend, but now he was acting not just as a neighbor. He seemed to know more than Mickey wanted him to. "Your mom is really worried," Tim began as they reached a bench and sat down. "She knows you've been skipping school and that you're hanging out with some people who mean you no good. I think you should explain to her what's going on." Mickey lowered his head and fell silent for a few minutes. He was gathering his thoughts, realizing that it was pointless to lie now. "I don't know how all of this happened," he finally replied. "At first, I just wanted to make some money to buy a tablet because I knew we didn't have much in the family." Tim listened intently, not interrupting. "I met this guy. He said he had a way to make some extra cash. I didn't think it was anything serious at first. Just a few favors, nothing special," Mickey continued, his voice becoming hollow. "But over time, it started to feel more like something dangerous. I just couldn't stop." "You realize this could be a crime, right?" Tim asked, leaning in closer. Mickey nodded. "Yeah, I get it. But I'm scared. If I try to get out of this, they could do something bad to me." Tim squeezed the boy's hand, letting him know he wasn't alone. "We'll help you. Your mom and I will. But you need to be honest with her. And we need to know everything so we can figure out what to do next." Mickey nodded again, his face looking weary. "I don't want Mom to worry. She already works so hard." "She worries more when you're hiding things from her," Tim said gently. "Go home and tell her everything. We'll find a way together." That evening, Mickey returned home, filled with hesitation. He knew he had to talk to his mother, but he was still afraid of her reaction. He found Janine in the kitchen, setting the table with dishes. "Mom, we need to talk," he said quietly, sitting down at the table. Janine looked up at her son, sensing that this moment would be difficult but also important. "Of course, what's going on?" Her voice was calm, but her eyes shone with concern. Mickey took a deep breath and began to recount everything that had happened over the past few weeks. The meeting with the man, the deal he had made, and how he couldn't get out of it without fearing the consequences. Janine listened silently, trying to hold back tears as he confessed to his mistakes. When Mickey finished, silence enveloped the room. Janine felt her heart ache at the fact that her son had fallen into such trouble, but at the same time, she was grateful that he had finally opened up. "We'll get through this," she finally said, leaning toward him. "But you need to promise me you won't lie again." Mickey nodded, unable to hold back the tears any longer. He realized he had made a huge mistake, but now he knew he wasn't alone in this. After talking with Mickey, Janine felt a weight lift from her shoulders, even though the problem still remained unresolved. She understood that her son, while he had confessed, was still in danger. Tim, who had been an unwavering support, helped Janine realize that they needed to proceed cautiously, as what Mickey was facing could have serious consequences. The next morning, Tim came over to their house. He was determined to confront the man who had dragged Mickey into these dangerous dealings. He suggested they find out who this man was so they could have concrete information to either report to the police or confront him personally. "We can't just leave this alone," Tim said, sitting in a chair in the kitchen where Janine was serving tea. "If this guy continues to control Mickey, he won't find peace." Janine nodded, gripping her cup tightly. She was grateful for the support but still felt scared. What if he does something to Mickey? Or to us? "I can't risk my son's life." Tim thoughtfully rubbed his chin, gazing out the window. "We'll proceed carefully. First, we need to find out more. Who this man is, what he does, and why he decided to get involved with a teenager in the first place." Mickey, sitting at the table nearby, looked weary but less scared than the day before. After confessing, he felt some relief, but still feared the repercussions. "I can try to find out more about this guy," he said quietly. "Maybe I can get some information from him or at least eavesdrop on some conversations." "No," Janine replied firmly. "You're not meeting with him again. We've already decided. You stay away, and Tim and I will figure out what to do." Mickey leaned back in his chair, a little disappointed but understanding that his mother was right. His desire to fix the situation was strong, but he also realized that intervening could only make things worse. In a few days, Tim began gathering information. Through acquaintances in the area, he learned that the man Mickey had been seeing was named Bart and was known in local criminal circles. He was involved in shady dealings related to stolen goods, which he sold through front men, like Mickey. Tim didn't want to contact the police immediately, fearing it might put Mickey at risk, so he decided to try talking to Bart personally. He was confident he could make it clear that continuing to involve Mickey could have unpleasant consequences. Janine, although concerned about this plan, trusted Tim. He had always been level-headed and calm in the toughest situations. The day of the meeting arrived. Tim arranged to meet Bart on neutral ground, at a cafe on the outskirts of town. He arrived early to assess the situation. Before long, Bart entered the establishment, looking as Mickey had described, tall, stocky, with rugged features. He sat down across from Tim, and their eyes met. "Who the hell are you and what do you want?" Bart asked bluntly, not hiding his displeasure. Tim remained calm. He wasn't there to intimidate Bart but didn't plan to appear weak either. "My name is Tim. I'm a friend of Mickey's family, that kid you've gotten involved in your dealings." Bart merely smirked slightly. "So what? You want me to stop working with him?" He agreed to it himself. "Mickey is still a child," Tim said calmly but firmly. "He didn't understand what he was getting into. But now his family knows, and you don't want to have problems with us." Bart raised an eyebrow mockingly. "And what are you going to do? Go to the police? They know nothing about me. I'm not worried about your threats." Tim remained collected, aware that he needed to proceed carefully. "I understand. But we'll make it clear that this is not a game. If something happens to him, you'll regret it. And believe me, we will find a way to get to you, no matter how far you think you can hide." Bart leaned back in his chair, the smirk on his face fading. Tim could see he wasn't just another person. He had his own issues and was unwilling to let go of Mickey without a fight. "I'll consider it," Bart replied finally, "but don't think you can scare me. I can do what I want." Tim stood up, refusing to let Bart see he was shaken. "Then we'll have to see how far this goes." Don't make it harder for yourself. Leaving the cafe, Tim felt mixed emotions. He had done what he needed to do, but he realized that Bart was not someone to be underestimated. The meeting did not yield the result he had hoped for, but at least he knew who he was dealing with. Upon returning home, Tim found Janine anxiously waiting for news. He shared everything that had happened, and they agreed that now they would have to keep an eye on Mickey while trying to give him as much support as possible. Over the following days, Janine and Tim began to work as a team, helping Mickey regain trust in them. They continued to encourage him to stay away from Bart, reminding him of how dangerous that man could be. Mickey, feeling the love and support from his mother and Tim, started to slowly rebuild his life. It was a long journey, but he began to distance himself from the past he had fallen into. Janine found solace in the fact that they were facing this battle together, united as a family. With every step forward, they felt a little more confident that, in the end, they would emerge victorious over the shadows that had threatened to engulf their lives.